Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We're about to explore a challenging and thought-provoking topic titled Evaluating Moral Distinctions: Suicide, Self-Defense, War, Terrorism, and Capital Punishment. This presentation will take us on an ethical examination of some of the most complex human actions, where moral lines can be difficult to define. I'm looking forward to diving into these important issues with you. Let's get started. Here we're looking at three fundamental approaches to ethical decision-making. First, deontological ethics, which centers on the idea that certain duties and moral rules are absolute and must be followed, no matter the consequences. Next, we have utilitarianism, which evaluates actions based on their outcomes, aiming to produce the greatest overall good for the most people. Finally, virtue ethics shifts the focus to character traits and moral virtues, highlighting the importance of developing good moral character when making ethical choices. These three principles provide different lenses through which we can assess moral situations. When we look at suicide through an ethical lens, one important perspective focuses on autonomy and deontological views. This approach respects an individual's right to make decisions about their own life, emphasizing personal freedom and self-determination. However, it also raises duty-based concerns, where some argue that moral obligations prohibit suicide regardless of personal choice. From a utilitarian standpoint, the emphasis shifts to the consequences of the act. Here, the potential suffering and harm caused to both the individual and those around them are carefully weighed to determine the ethical implications. Additionally, we must consider mental health and the social context, which play a crucial role in how suicide is morally assessed. Recognizing vulnerability and approaching the topic with compassion, here we delve into the moral justifications and limits of self-defense. First, let's consider the moral criteria that guide the use of force. The threat must be immediate, meaning there is no time to delay a response. The response itself must be proportional, so it matches the severity of the threat, avoiding excessive force. Finally, necessity limits the use of force to what is absolutely essential to protect oneself. Moving on to ethical frameworks, different philosophies approach self-defense in unique ways. Deontology focuses on strict adherence to duty and intention, emphasizing that actions must be morally right regardless of outcomes. Utilitarianism, on the other hand, evaluates the overall consequences, justifying self-defense if it leads to the greatest good. Virtue ethics looks at the moral character, considering whether the person acting in self-defense is demonstrating virtues such as courage and justice. Together, these criteria and frameworks provide a comprehensive understanding of when and how self-defense can be morally justified. Here we explore the core principles of just war theory, which provides an ethical framework for waging war. First, the concept of just cause emphasizes that war must be fought to confront a real and serious danger or injustice. Next, legitimate authority means that only properly recognized authorities have the power to declare war. Right intention stresses that the purpose of war should be to promote good or correct a wrong. The principle of last resort requires that all peaceful alternatives must be exhausted before resorting to war. Proportionality ensures that the violence used in war is proportional to the injuries suffered, preventing excessive harm. Finally, discrimination highlights the need to distinguish between military targets and non-combatants, protecting innocent lives. Together, these ethical guidelines help establish when and how war can be morally justified. Here we focus on understanding terrorism from a moral and ethical perspective. First, defining terrorism involves recognizing that it deliberately targets civilians or non-combatants, which is why it is widely condemned morally across various ethical frameworks. This intentional targeting raises serious questions about the justification and impact of such actions. Next, the intent behind terrorism is crucial. It often stems from political grievances or causes. For example, violent acts carried out with the aim of achieving political goals show the complexity of motivations behind terrorism. Finally, distinguishing terrorism from insurgency presents significant ethical challenges. This is especially complicated by tactics like asymmetric warfare and the involvement of civilians, which blur the lines between different forms of conflict, and raise difficult moral questions. The image here, showing a cloaked figure in a desolate urban landscape, underscores the mysterious and troubling nature of terrorism in our world. Here we examine the ethics behind state-sanctioned killing or capital punishment. First, there's retribution. The idea that punishing an offender meets society's demand for justice, aligning with retributive ethics. Then we consider the risk of wrongful execution, which is a critical concern. Making an irreversible mistake violates individual rights and raises strong moral objections from a deontological perspective. Lastly, execution can provide a sense of closure for victims and their families, offering a form of justice that may benefit society as a whole, according to utilitarian views. These key points highlight the complex ethical landscape surrounding capital punishment. Here we have a comparison of four major ethical principles: deontology, utilitarianism, virtue ethics, and just war or legal principles, across several significant issues. Looking at suicide, deontology, virtue ethics, and just war principles generally consider it impermissible, while utilitarianism views it conditionally, depending on the circumstances and consequences. When it comes to self-defense, all four ethical frameworks agree that it is permissible, highlighting a shared value on protecting life. For war, the perspectives vary. Deontology and just war principles see it as conditional, likely involving strict criteria, whereas utilitarianism and virtue ethics tend to consider it permissible under certain conditions. Regarding terrorism, all four principles uniformly reject it as impermissible, reflecting a common ethical stance against harm to innocents. Lastly, capital punishment is viewed conditionally across all frameworks, indicating nuanced considerations based on context and justification. This table helps us understand how different ethical theories navigate complex moral dilemmas with both overlapping and distinct judgments. Here we see a stacked bar chart that breaks down the utilitarian perspective on taking life across different contexts. The horizontal axis lists the scenarios: suicide, self-defense, war, terrorism, and capital punishment. For each case, the chart shows four components influencing net utility. First, immediate harm represents the direct negative impact on individuals involved. As expected, terrorism and suicide cause the highest immediate harm, with values of -9 and -8, respectively. Societal harm captures broader community effects, and here, terrorism again ranks worst at -8, showing the widespread damage it causes. Next, deterrence or benefit reflects potential positive outcomes. War, for example, scores a 4, suggesting some utilitarian justification based on deterrence. Self-defense also has a positive value of 3, indicating it is often seen as more justifiable. Finally, uncertainty or risk accounts for unpredictable consequences. Terrorism and war have significant negative values here, highlighting the high risk and unpredictability associated with these cases. Overall, this chart helps illustrate how utilitarians weigh complex factors differently depending on the context of taking life, balancing harm, benefit, and risk to determine net utility. Here we're focusing on deontological approaches to killing and moral duties. First, rule-based ethics emphasizes that our ethical duties come from fixed moral laws. These laws strictly prohibit treating others as mere means to achieve our own ends, underscoring respect for individuals. Moving on to absolute prohibitions, killing is generally forbidden under this framework. This prohibition is rooted in the principle of respecting others as autonomous beings with inherent worth. However, there are permissible exceptions, such as self-defense, where the intention behind an action plays a crucial role in moral evaluation. Protecting rights in these specific cases can justify actions that would otherwise be considered impermissible. This approach highlights the balance between adherence to moral rules and the nuanced consideration of intentions in ethical decisions. Here we dive into virtue ethics and the crucial role that intentions play in this approach. First, we have courage, symbolized by a shield. This virtue empowers individuals to confront extreme challenges, especially those life-and-death decisions, by drawing on deep moral strength. Next is compassion, represented by a heart. Compassion urges us to feel empathy and genuine care for others. particularly those who are affected by critical actions. Finally, justice, depicted with balanced scales, helps guide us towards fairness and balance when faced with tough moral choices. Together, these virtues highlight how intentions shape not just what we do, but who we are as moral agents. Here, we're looking at some of the critical aspects of justice, rights, and moral legitimacy, especially in situations that can mean life or death. First, when we talk about rights, the focus is on the fundamental right to life and personal autonomy. It's crucial that these are protected, particularly ensuring that non-combatants, those not involved in conflict, are safeguarded. Next, justice and fair procedures play a vital role. This means any action taken must follow due process, be proportional, and treat everyone equally without discrimination. Moving on to legitimacy and authority, the state's power must be based on consent and bound by moral limits, which is essential when justifying serious actions. Finally, there's the comparison of claims. Individual claims like self-defense often stand in contrast to broader state claims, such as the justification for capital punishment. This balance, symbolized by the scale with question marks, reminds us of the complexity and necessity of careful moral reasoning in these scenarios. Here we summarize the moral distinctions and overlaps in these complex issues. First, let's look at the distinctive features. Each case has unique ethical concerns. Suicide cases often revolve around autonomy and vulnerability, while terrorism cases involve the deliberate targeting of civilians. These differences are critical in shaping our moral understanding. Next, we see common moral themes that recur across cases. These include the intention behind actions, how we assess the harm caused, ensuring responses are proportional, and recognizing the role of authority in making ethical judgments. These themes help us find consistent ways to evaluate different scenarios. Finally, contextual influences play a major role. Mental health considerations, coercion, societal impact, and legal safeguards all significantly affect how we morally evaluate situations and determine what is permissible. The image here illustrates the crossroads we face, choosing between inactivity and taking energetic, conscious action. Understanding these layers helps us navigate these challenging moral landscapes. As we wrap up, let's focus on some key ethical takeaways. First, killing can be permissible in situations where protecting lives is paramount, such as self-defense or carefully regulated military actions. However, there are strict prohibitions against intentionally targeting innocent people, and many argue that acts like suicide or certain executions are morally unacceptable. It's also crucial to consider the broader context. Mental health, coercion, and proportionality all play vital roles in how we make ethical judgments. Lastly, policy and ethical safeguards like due process, transparency, and minimizing wrongful harm are essential to ensure fairness and protect rights. These points help us navigate the complex moral landscape surrounding life and death decisions.